Of all of the cars which I discuss in terms of potentially coming back from Gran Turismo 6 and returning in Gran Turismo's future, maybe in GT7, maybe in whatever the next game ends up being, there are some which are so far ahead of others in terms of how much people would want them to return, and regardless of whether you think it could or couldn't, will or won't, this is the one which I think so many people really wish would come back. Now, it was already a premium, and you could argue, given whose brain the car came from, that there is more of a chance, maybe than some others, of it coming back, because of course, for those who don't know, this car actually came from the mind of Gordon Murray, who famously also, of course, spawned the McLaren F1 and now the Gordon Murray T50. This one, though, will be instantly familiar to most Gran Turismo 6 players because it was such a ridiculously OP road car. This thing was literally up there with stuff like the Ferrari FXX and the Tommy Kaira ZZ2 in terms of being just stupid quick. It was way too quick to be allowed into events, and this is the exact kind of car where if it were around in the Gran Turismo 4 days, it would have not been allowed to compete in any events. Just like the Caterham wasn't, just like the Audi Streamliner wasn't, like those vehicles, and of course more recently others like the KTM Crossbow, which was also in GT6, but unlike this car, still is, Gran Turismo has this small but reasonably good helping of open-wheel pure sports cars. And there were even some in there which were weirder than this. You could say the Nike One, for example, was one of the original ones to have in Gran Turismo, and even others which I quite like the Toyota Motor Triathlon. And interestingly, the light car company Rocket shares one key thing in common with the Motor Triathlon concept, which is tandem seating, like a fighter jet. The passenger actually sits behind the driver. In the game you can't really tell. It looks like a single-seater, like what is in my opinion a way cooler car than this, but never fully got the chance, the Vanwall, the GPR V12, which you can play in Project Gotham. It was featured very briefly on Top Gear, I think it was. Always loved that car with that big old Jag V12 and that old Grand Prix body. This was also inspired by old Grand Prix cars, and definitely the craziest thing about the Rocket, for those who know nothing about this car, is how light it is. But this really does take it to the next level. This is so light, in fact, it barely weighs more than the engine in my car. My V8 Lincoln, it's a cast iron engine that weighs the best part of 800 pounds, or a 4-cylinder and especially a 6-cylinder Cummins diesel engine also weighs about the same as this entire car. This thing is 390 kilos. That's not much more than 800 pounds for the whole car. And because of that, the fact that it's powered by a motorcycle engine is a perfect combination. It's a Yamaha 1.1 litre with 166 horsepower, and as you'd expect from a motorcycle, not a huge amount of torque, 86 foot-pounds. But again, with such a small amount of weight, very high revving engine, it's perfect for that. This is pretty much a motorcycle that happens to have 4 wheels, and I would argue that the best rival to this, not in terms of pure performance, because this was definitely the quicker of the two, but in terms of how OP it was really between this and the Suzuki GSX-R4. Now, the key difference is I don't really think the Suzuki has much of a chance, in all honesty, of coming back. This one, on the other hand, well, the fact that it was in before, it was already a premium, it comes from the mind of Gordon Murray. It actually wasn't built by Gordon Murray, though. Incidentally, it was built by a race driver, Chris Craft. But still, having all of these top shelf names involved, already being in there, already being a premium, still having Gordon Murray's designs in there in the form of all the McLaren F1 variations, to me this definitely has a better chance, and I do think this one has a reasonably good chance, at least, of coming back in future. It's one of those cars which is so undeniably, so ridiculously good. How could you not have it come back? And I seem to recall, surprise surprise, me being the automotive hipster that I am, I didn't really used to use this car much, but I seem to recall many players who did love this talking quite a lot about how much of an advantage the fuel economy had over many others, which makes sense. In real life it definitely doesn't. Motorcycle engines are often not as good on fuel as you'd think because they rev so high and you're constantly injecting fuel, but in a game they seem to base it more on just the size of the engine and the weight of the vehicle. Another really cool little feature is the headlights, which kind of rotate around the front end. They don't pop out of the vehicle, they come up from underneath on a swivel, which is quite a cool little thing. And in terms of performance, the on-paper numbers of about 166 horsepower doesn't sound like much in standard form, and asking 100 grand for this car seems a bit excessive, but when you tune it, that really is when it all makes sense. The point level on this was ridiculous. This was a 550 point car. Back when the Red Bull Junior, famously, which really annoyed me, was something like 730 points. That disparity between the two cars was utterly insane, especially when you could fully build this thing. I think it was 650 points maximum, but at that point you were running, if I recall correctly, something like 350 horsepower out of that engine, and this could do over 250 miles an hour without NOS and without slipstream, plus being insanely quick through corners. So for me, this is definitely one of those cars where I never loved it like so many other people did, but it is definitely undeniable how ridiculously good the Rocket is. I could see loads of people having so much fun with the livery editor on this thing. I think if this were to come back, maybe the fact that it is so ridiculously OP for its price and its power might make them avoid it. But if they were to, I think lots of returning players would be super happy, and yeah, I could definitely see it having a place in Gran Turismo again. But that's it for my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours down below, and of course I'll see you again in future with more revisits from GT6. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, thanks for watching.